today we will be flying the DC-3. The Douglas DC-3 is the predecessor to the Convair CV-240, which was chartered by the southern rock band Lynyrd Skynyrd on October 20, 1977, on the day of their fateful plane crash. One of the differences between the Convair and the DC-3 is that the Convair has a pressurized cabin. It also has a different landing gear configuration. The band was flying from Greenville, South Carolina to Baton Rouge, Louisiana as part of their tour in support of their new album, Street Survivors. Singer Ronnie Van Zant, tired from partying the night before, opted to nap on the floor of the plane near the aisle, while others played cards. The band members sat in the front section of the plane while most of the road crew and others sat in the back. This dealt a hand that would ultimately determine who would receive the fatal injuries, as the front of the plane absorbed most of the impact upon crashing. "26 souls were aboard November 5 Victor Mike that day. A day that struck down one of the greatest American rock and roll bands, like an oak tree in front of a speeding car. On the previous flight from Lakeland, Florida the day before, fire could be seen spewing from the right engine shortly after takeoff. The pilots thought there was an issue with the magneto and arranged to have the mechanic meet them in Baton Rouge to get it fixed. Gene Odom, head of security for the band, argued with the pilots to have the issue fixed before leaving for Baton Rouge. The pilot in command said the plane was safe to make the flight, stating that the plane could still be flown with one engine if the other went out. This proved to be a foolish decision.
Ready for departure to the west.
While at the Greenville airport, the plane had been fueled up with 400 gallons of 100-octane low-lead fuel. The pilot stated on his flight plan that he had 5 hours of fuel for a 2-hour and 45-minute flight.
November 55 Victor Mike continue for west departure.
In 1967, a cover band called the Noble Five, which would later become Lynyrd Skynyrd, opened up for the Allman Brothers, who at the time called themselves the Hourglass. Duane and Greg Allman sat down with the fledgling Lynyrd Skynyrd after the concert and told them that they thought they were very talented, but they needed to quit playing cover songs and start writing their own material. They said that they should find a place where they could create and practice as much as they could, so that they might achieve their full potential. The band got a cabin on a farm near Green Cove Springs in Florida where they would write and rehearse 7 days a week, morning till night. The cabin was nothing more than a shack with a tin roof, no insulation, and no air conditioning. The normal heat and humidity of the Florida swamp combined with the heat put off by the vacuum tube-powered guitar amplifiers made things extra sweaty. This extreme heat situation earned the shack the fitting moniker, Hell House. The band was so well rehearsed that every guitar solo was played exactly the same every time they played the song. Most other bands of the time period would improvise their solos. Also very impressive is the fact that Ronnie Van Zant never wrote down any of his lyrics. He would come up with them in his head as the band played and commit them to memory. He was once quoted saying, "If it isn't worth remembering the next day, it isn't worth keeping." Under Ronnie's leadership, the band became a fine-tuned rock and roll machine. The pilots climbed to their requested altitude of 12,000 feet and proceeded according to their flight plan. Band members on board that day were singer Ronnie Van Zant, guitarists Gary Rossington, Alan Collins, Steve Gaines, keyboardist Billy Powell, drummer Artemis Pyle, and bass player Leon Wilkinson. Also on board were backup singers Cassie Gaines and Leslie Hawkins. There were also several members of the road crew and band management on the plane, as well as security manager and lifelong friend of Ronnie, Gene Odom. Drummer Artemis Pyle, who was trained in aviation when he was in the Marines, noticed that there seemed to be engine trouble. He went to the cockpit and saw that they were running the right engine in the auto-rich position. The pilots said they were trying to smooth out the rough-running engine. At 6:39 p.m., November 55 Victor Mike was cleared to descend to and maintain 6,000 feet. According to the NTSB report, at 6:40 p.m., the flight told Houston Center, "We're out of 2,000 for 6,000. Gene Odom recalled how the plane began to violently lurch back and forth and pivot as the engines became starved of fuel. We can safely assume that this was a very alarming situation." Then, 2 minutes later at 6:40, they radioed Houston Center again saying, "Yes, sir, we need to get to an airport, the closest airport you've got, sir." Houston asked if they were in emergency status. The reply was, "Yes, sir, we're low on fuel and we're just about out of it. We want vectors to Macomb. Post haste, please, sir." Houston gave them vectors to Macomb, advising them to turn to heading 025. A minute later they called Houston again. "Center, 5 Victor Mike, we're out of fuel." Center replied, "Roger, understand you're out of fuel?" The pilot replied, "I am sorry, it's just an indication of it." There is no explanation as to what this indication was. At 6:45, Houston requested 5 Victor Mike's altitude. They responded, "We're at 4.5. This was the last communication between Houston Center and the flight crew. At 6:55, an aircraft in the area reported picking up a weak signal from an emergency locator transmitter. A helicopter from the Coast Guard station at New Orleans was notified and arrived in the vicinity of the crash 30 minutes later. After receiving the ELT signal, the helicopter located the wreckage at 7:36 p.m. The plane careened into the trees just yards shy of the open field that the crew was trying to reach. As the aircraft pummeled through the trees, the wings were torn off and the fuselage broke in half after hitting trees as thick as 3 feet in diameter. Oddly enough, running out of fuel is probably one of the more fortunate causes for a plane crash, as there's no fire. If there had been fuel left in the tanks, there likely would have been many more casualties. Drummer Artemis Pyle survived the wreck pretty banged up with several broken ribs. He made his way through the swamp to try and get help. He came upon a farmhouse, but as he got closer he saw a man come out holding a rifle. The man said, "Stop right there." But Artemis stumbled forward and the man fired his rifle, hitting Artemis in the shoulder and spinning him around. The helicopter could be seen searching not too far away, and the farmer rationalized that the long-haired Artemis must have been an escaped convict. Upon realizing his mistake, he was very apologetic and organized a search party, letting Artemis point him in the right direction. The NTSB summarized that the probable cause of this accident was fuel exhaustion and total loss of power from both engines due to crew inattention to fuel supply. Contributing to the fuel exhaustion were inadequate flight planning and an engine malfunction of undetermined nature in the right engine, which resulted in higher than normal fuel consumption. This horrific accident took the lives of Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines, his sister Cassie Gaines, assistant road manager Dean Kilpatrick, pilot Walter McCreary, and co-pilot William Gray. It was Steve Gaines' first and only album with the band. He had only been with the band a year. Van Zant had a tremendous admiration for the young, talented guitarist. The Street Survivors album cover depicted flames behind the band, Gaines in particular being engulfed by a large amount of flames. This prompted a revision of the album cover afterwards. The band was a mere 10 minutes from their destination in Baton Rouge when they crashed, but they will live forever in glory as a band who inspired millions of people with their message of freedom and good time Southern rock and roll.